Okay, but one thing that is really hard is that the domain range is not the same of the screen. So that is why we didn't try to use, for example, for now the values of my data, just using the index. Because if I have like a domain that goes from 0 to 2000, how do I map this domain to a widget that go only from 0 to 150? So I have to map that. So in some case, just dividing is a easy way, but not always. So sometimes you have really trick changes. For example, if this is not the 0 and should start from 10 or things like that. Or if you want a logarithmic scale instead of a linear scale. So D3 provides one thing for you that helps with that are scales. So you can use scales to convert the data domain to the visualization domain. And they make things be much easier. So for example, here I have a scale, a linear scale, and I can define the range. And in the range, I am defining how many pixels this domain can use. And in domain, I define the domain in the data. And basically is the minimum, that where it starts, and maximum is where it ends. And the same thing for the domain of the data. So we have some scales predefined that we have, for example, linear, if you want a normal scale. We have ordinal when you have like categorical data. So you can provide an array with keys, and D3 will create a value for each key, and you just ask for the value for that key. That is very useful when you are positioning bar charts, for example, the bars in the x-axis. We have logarithmic scale when you have the data change you have very small compared with very big ones. So you can use log scale so you can reduce this difference. Another useful scales that D3 have are the color scale. So you can create color scale using linear. So if you want, for example, to go from green to white, or even divergent if you want to go from green to white and then to blue, or so on. So you can use linear. These two, and they have others as well, is very helpful because they already provide you some colors that are based in the Color Brewer project. And you don't have to, if you are not concerned about which specific color you're gonna use to each thing, and if you are just starting sometimes also your visualization and you can deal with the color later, you are just trying to decide if you are going to use color or not. So you can use those. So this is a list of 10 different colors, and every time you ask for a color, D3 will associate the key with the color. So if you ask for the same key, you get the same color. And this is a list with 20 colors. So one thing that you're still having to define in scales is the min and max. So how do we decide in the domain which values to use? So you have to compute which one is the minimum value and which one is the maximum value. So D3 has some functions that help you with that. So you can use D3.max and provide your data, an array, and then a function that returns the value that you want the max. So for example, here I want the max income in my data. So I provide the data and then I return the income so I can get the maximum income. I have the same thing for minimum, and this will return a value. Or if I want both, I can use extent that will return an array with the mean in the 0 position and the max in the 1 position. So they map directly to what a scale expect. That is an array with a mean position and the max position. So let's go back to my previous example and see how we can replace these random values for the original data values by using scale to support that. So the first thing that I have to do is actually creating the scales. So let's create them. So this is my X scale, and this will be D3.scale.linear and the range of this scale. So remember, range is how many pixels I can use. So in the X, I can go from 0 to my inner width. So remember that 0 here actually is here and not here, because I have a translate in my group here. So I can start from 0 and go up to my inner width. The second scale that I want to create is my Y scale. And this one, the range goes from 0 to my inner height. Okay, so now I have the two scales that I need. The problem is that I have the range, but I don't have the domain for them. So one thing that I need to define the domain is the data. So if I write that here, I don't have the data already, because remember, this is asynchronous. So this code runs before this one specifically. Okay, so I can only assign the domain in the render section, in my render function that will be only called after the data is loaded. So here I'm gonna update the domain of the scale. So the domain of my first scale is not this. I can use the extend function of the tree to compute the minimum and the maximum value. So I can provide my data, and then I can provide a function that will return my value that is delicious. And let's update the domain of my Y scale. So the same thing, d3.extend, so I can get the minimum and the max. And here is a call. And I want to return sugar. Okay. Now I want to replace my random value by the correct value. So let's start without scale and see how it looks like. So if I replace this just by the deliciousness and this by the sugar, I miss an I here. And here. Okay, so you see that I don't expand for everything. That is why scales are for, to be able to expand this so I can map the original data. So in this case, my domain of my data is smaller than the SVG, so I see the very small. If it was bigger, then I would not be able to see all the dots. So now I just can use my scale that I created to transform this value to the visualization value. And now I have the x-axis fixed, and I can do the same thing with the Y scale. So now I have my chart. And one thing that is interesting is, remember that this grows from the top. So this is a high value and this is a low value. That's not what we are used in a scatter plot. We are used that the ones that are here are the high value. So our data is flipped because the way that the coordinates in the SVG work. So using scales, we can easily fix that. We can invert the range here, meaning that the minimum in the domain will actually map to the maximum in the height. So if I invert these two, I get my scatter plot in the right direction. So this is very helpful using scales. So let's suppose that I want to create a color scale, a categorical one, and I want that each dot to receive a different color. So because I have only 6, I can use the d3 dot scale dot category 10. So this will return a scale that supports up to 10 colors. And then what I can do is I can set my fill based on this. And I will set the fill based on the index of the circle. So I can do color scale I. So now I have each dot with a different color. So, and D3 saves the key. So let's suppose that I don't want actually that. I want the ones in the odd position to be one color in my list, and the ones in the even position to be a different color. So I could do I mod 2. So now the ones we have 3 which ones, because we have 3 odds and 3 even, and each of them have one specific color for odd and for even. So those are really an easy way to create a categorical scale using color, but of course you can specify, you can create scales using your own color or specify your own domain of color, and also specify which key should map to which color. Okay, one thing that I want to say about the data that we are using is how to read the data. So you can now map your visualization correctly. So we are using the Gapminder, and just to remember you, I am posting a new version. So this is not the same data that you used in the last week. So this is a new one. So make sure to get the new file, because we change how the data is structured to make things simple. So this is my data. So we have 108 countries, and for each country we have the income of the country, the life expectancy, the name, the population, and the region of the country. For those three, we can see each value for each year. So if I want values for 2008, 2009, I can access it. So as example, if I have just one specific country, let's take the first one. I will have exactly the same fields. And if I want to access, for example, the income of this country, then I can do income, and I can use the year here to access the year that I'm looking for. So if I want the income in 2006, then I can do the country point dot income, and I can put 2006. So this is the income from Angola. That is the country that I'm looking in 2006. So how that would map to D3? So assume that I have a list. I can use the same thing that we did last week. That is select this list. And then select our allies. And then I can bind some data. And then for each new one, I can append ally. And then I can set the text to be equal. So this is basically what we did last week, And if I want, for example, to append the income of the country, I can do d dot income, but because I have many years, we always have to provide a year. So 2008, for example. So then I can have all the ones which the values for 2008. So one thing that you notice is that some countries are undefined. So you have to deal with that. And the easy way is to eliminate them from your data. So if I want to visualize the year 2008, I can just filter them. So I can do result is equal result dot filter. So this will filter my data, and then I can return only the ones whose the income in 2008 were different of undefined. So this will select only the countries with values for 2008. So you will see that we don't have Tokelau here anymore. And if you want to keep the original data, you can just declare a different result here, like result filtered, and just pass that for the tree. And then you will still having the original data here if you want like to change between years and so on. So that's the data. Make sure to use the new file, otherwise it's a little harder to access the value for each specific year. Great. So now again is your turn. So take the previous page, and we want to remove this random component of the page. I want you to map the X position to the income. I want to map you the Y position to the life expectancy. And I want you to map the size of the ball to the population. And also the color, I want to map to the region of our data. So remember that we have all these fields for each country. And one thing, don't forget to invert the Y scale so you can make sure that the ones that are high are in the top. Okay, so thank you. Remember to submit your assignment this week. Keep posting your doubts and comments and even tips that you have in the forum. And I see you next week.